For more than 100 years in Shell, we assess staff in three areas. One is we assess them on the potential of the staff. That means we predict in their entire career in Shell how far they will go if they're given all the opportunities and all the training required. And that's what we call a currently estimated potential. That's one. So that means,
how do you measure that?
So there are four elements in the measurement. One is
Welcome to the Game of Impossible podcast. My name is Leon. This is my dad, Idris Jala. We are a father-son podcast where we discuss every single Friday all things to do with transformation through the lens of business, leadership, sport, and faith. Dad, we recently did a live version of our Game of Impossible podcast with a company called Knight Frank, a consulting firm focusing on property. Now, during the session there, and in fact, even online, a lot of people ask the question of how do we deal with non-performance? Mm-hmm. To give a bit of context, last week's episode, one of the things that you touched on was your approach to releasing good talent within the firm, within your teams. You know, if someone really talented wants to leave, actually not just allowing it, blessing it, but actually encouraging it as well. And he talked about how this creates almost this revolving door effect of good people leaving, but also then allowing for good people to come in as word goes around of what a positive experience it is working in this firm. So some people have also then asked, well, that's really great. A lot of people were excited about that. But people also ask, where do you draw the line with people who are non-performing?
Right.
So I thought it might be good for us to discuss today non-performance.
Right.
Wonderful. At the end of the day, we are not just all fun and games. There are actually still boundaries for how we and expectations on our teams. So non-performance. And interestingly enough, just yesterday, the news broke out that the UK now has a new Prime Minister.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe let's talk about non-performance on a maybe more global scale, socio-political scale, first of all. What are your thoughts on what happened in the UK?
So I think if you ask me the question, do you think that the voting public in the UK made their decision because in their eyes, the Conservative Party did not perform according to the expectation? So the answer is yes, unequivocally as far as I'm concerned. So if you look at performance there, they made a lot of conservative, in the Conservative Party had the manifesto. One of the biggest things they put forward in their 14 years that they've been around, they said, if we get out from Brexit, that's like the promised land. But since they got out, the problem is they never really got the benefit out from it. As far as the public is concerned, you made a promise. Suddenly everything will be good. So instead of being a promised land for Brexit, it has become a bane of Brexit. The recent poll suggests, in the UK, they just did a recent poll. In fact, they said, the recent polls indicate people wishing to rejoin the EU now outnumber those who still support Brexit, which is widely regarded as the biggest economic misstep of the UK. So that's why they got punished for Brexit, number one. The other promises they made lots of promises about, dealing with rising cost of living, inflation. But they didn't deal with that. The problems were there. They made promises about improving NHS. The long waiting list for people to get their treatment for cancer, diabetes, and all those kinds of problems is still there. They made some improvement, but still a problem. And then they made huge promise about stopping the illegal immigrants coming from the coast of from France using the small boats. So that they didn't implement as well. So there are a lot of promises that they made that they did not fulfill. To make matters worse, while they did not spend enough money to improve NHS, when COVID came, they really got punished because the NHS was brought directly to its level of capacity. And so there were a huge problem in tackling that. Now, if you may remember, Leon, in our episode number 18, we talk about future-proofing governments. And we talked about this. And I said, governments must reinvent the business model, the economic model to deal with this. In the UK, I made mention, in fact, the debt public debt of the government in the UK as percentage of GDP stands at 101%. So this is the problem, because the debt level is so high. That's 2.7 trillion pounds. That's what it is, and that's 100%, 101% of GDP. They are also in a fiscal deficit of 6%. Now, if you have a problem with high debt and you have fiscal deficit, and you make lots of promises about wanting to improve NHS, you don't have the money to do it. So this is the problem. Now, Liz Truss, you may recall, she made a promise that if you vote me, she said, I'm going to reduce taxes. She went out the other way around. Of course,
Very
when she
populist
went,
approach.
very populist. And she did it. She presented a budget and she was punished. In 49 days, she was out. I think all of these things are pointing to one thing. The economic model is flawed today. So with the new government in the UK, with Keir Starmer coming in, he still has to deal with this big problem. The big problem, what to do with their fiscal deficit as well as the huge government debt. So whatever promises they are making, they still have the same problem. But they have to tackle this problem, otherwise you cannot fulfill your promises. And then the public will say you didn't perform. And to be fair, the public is saying, well, we give you 14 years conservative government, this conservative government, the one we just lost, and you didn't perform. You didn't deliver on the promises. We gave you enough time with no excuses. And that's why they were punished. In fact, the number of seats that they won, they only won 121 seats. And Labour Party won 412 seats. In fact, based on statistics, this is the worst election result for the Conservative government, arguably since the year, I think I look at the date here, since the year 1832. So, to me, the fact that they were completely trounced, without doubt, this is, as far as the voting public is, you did not perform.
Yep. Interestingly, Rishi Sunak called for this election.
Oh, yeah.
I did find it rather interesting that he would call for it, because I think for you to make a move like that, you either have to be very, very confident in the performance of your administration, and therefore want to send a signal to say we are so confident that we're going to call for an election because we're going to win, or possibly you really just kind of don't want the position anymore, and maybe this is a good get out of jail free card to play. What are your thoughts on why he might have made this move?
I think he probably did some miscalculation there, as you rightly pointed out. Maybe he might have said, if we are going to call it now, maybe the right time is doing it, because he expects it might get even worse. You must remember, COVID was there, so they've already spent a lot of money. The bullets were shot on dealing with COVID, so a lot of money was spent on COVID. To make matters worse, there's the Ukraine war. So the British government had made a lot of commitment to provide arms to help Ukraine in this war. So in his mind, I think he's probably worried that it may get even worse. So maybe this is the right time to make. To be fair, I mean, David Cameron made a huge political blunder. He called for the referendum because he was very confident he was going to win, and of course he lost. So I think there are times when people make kinds of wrong political calculations. They think they might get it right, but it's clearly wrong. The fact of the matter is this. We talked about issue about performance. This is the fact. The fact of it is the public is saying you did not perform as far as our expectations goes, and the expectation is there because of the promises that you made in your electoral campaign. And if you didn't perform, that's it. It's very simple. In votes are simple. I mean, you don't have to do staff appraisal. It's the votes that count.
Some people might argue that perhaps it's a little unfair on the last few administrations, because I mean, just look at how many prime ministers the UK has gone through in the past few years. And some people might argue, well, they have inherited a great deal of problems, and therefore, that's the best they can do with the hand that they are dealt. And there's this Latin term, materium superbat opus, which means that the workmanship is better than the material.
Yeah.
So in other words, actually, it doesn't really matter. The argument here is actually, it doesn't matter what hand you're dealt. It's what you do about it, because what you choose to do, what you choose to implement in action, that is within your control.
Absolutely.
What do you think are some actionable things perhaps that this incoming administration can maybe do to be able to help steer the UK and actually perhaps set the tone for the rest of the world actually to get out of this current debt crisis that we find ourselves in?
I believe that Keir Starmer must come clean. He must paint the picture exactly what is happening today so that the public knows it. You must manage the expectation. So he must say, we are at a level where our debt level has risen to more than 101% of GDP. Our fiscal deficit stands at 6%. If we want to spend money to improve the NHS, we have to get revenue. Where does revenue come from? Taxes. So it has no choice to deal with this. So I think if he does not start painting the clear picture to everybody else, he's got a problem. Back to the comment you made about, whatever you handed on, the facts of the matter is that you have to tackle it. That's the reality. Whether it's Conservative government, whether it's a Labour Party, they still have to deal with the issue about the very, very limited fiscal space that they have in the UK. That is the thing that they need to challenge. To me, it's very simple. If you do that, you can only do two things. One, you increase your revenue through taxes. Two, you cut your costs. There are no two ways around it. And if you don't do that, you run into trouble. So if you don't cut your costs, then you run into trouble. But if you want to grow the economy, you have to allow the private sector to flourish. But if you cut your costs and you make life very difficult for the private sector, there's no corporate wealth that comes in there. You cannot create wealth, you cannot create jobs, then you got lots of problems. So you have to fundamentally deal with the public, making sure they understand where you stand today and move. And I mentioned in episode 18, the Scandinavians have figured a way how to do it. They say that if you want to improve public health, public transport, all those things, the social protection for the poor, we have to have revenue. And that's why they justified, we increase taxes. That's why in Scandinavia, Switzerland, Sweden, Denmark, they're all very high taxes. But people accept high taxes if they know a level of transparency how the money will be spent. For them, they move into a devolved power where 70% of the taxes is spent on local government. So the folks in the municipal council, they know exactly where the money will be spent. And so because you move into a very different model, people accept that you now have to increase taxes. So if you don't do it that way, I think people will really give you a hard time if you're really going to increase taxes and it's opaque how you're going to spend that money. And so I think you have to fundamentally reject it. So I wish Keir Starmer really all the best in what he's trying to do, because to me, those are very simple stuff that needs to be done, but they are not an easy thing to do. I'm always reminded by a comment by Professor Marty Linsky, transformational leadership is about disappointing people at the rate they'll permit you to. So he has to tell them, this is the problem we are today. I have to take some tough measures. You must allow me to do it. But if we don't do this, this is a consequence. He needs to paint that picture clear to everybody.
Let's bring it down now to a team context. How do we then disappoint people at the rate in which they would allow us to in the context of performance development and management?
Well, let's take the PEMANDU example. When we first formed PEMANDU Associates as a firm, I had 13 partners that reported to me. We collectively said we wanted to create a high-performing organization. That's what we said collectively, we agreed. And we then agreed that the way we work is that our true north was net income after tax. So the 13 partners, they were measured every 2 weeks on their contribution for as a partner on a two weekly basis on net income after tax. And we ranked them, who is number one, who is number two, right up to number 13. And so we made it very transparent. So we gave them tremendous latitude to go and run business, to go and get clients, to charge as much or as little as they want to. But the bottom line is what it is. And we concluded at the end of each year, 2 of them will be demoted. So if you don't perform, you get demoted just like the English Premier League to the next division. And we promote 2 from below. But you can still come back if you're in the lower division, in this case. But if you perform really well, you can still come back the following year, because every year we remove 2. So when we came with the idea of demotion, it became very clear that we made a signal to everybody, you know it. And the beauty, Leon, is this. There's no surprise at the end of the year who is going to be demoted, because every 2 weeks, we know the ranking order. So if you are number 13 or number 12, you know you are due to be removed at the end of the year. So you better make your performance to improve it throughout the year. So I would say today, if you don't have a method like that, not a transparent way to do it, then it becomes very opaque. People will argue with you. Why are you punishing me for doing it? It becomes very transparent. You can do what you need to do. So that's how we then, with a very pragmatic approach in tackling that.
Peter Drucker said that productivity of work is not the responsibility of the worker, but ultimately of the manager. And I agree with that. What you have just described as well, that is also an example of leadership or management taking control of the situation. In this case, creating an environment for productivity, an environment for performance, because nobody wants to be in the bottom, the bottom two, and face relegation, as it were. But in terms of, from maybe a coaching standpoint, what is the role of then a manager or a leader to then also provide some sort of direct one-to-one coaching for their teams? And what is your approach to doing that?
So the thing is this, throughout the whole year, those folks who are down below in the ranking, they will come to you. I mean, I'm their supervisor. Of course, I'm the CEO and the president of the firm. They will sit with me and ask me, what are the suggestions that I might put forward that might help. So I give them lots of input. On top of that, I also tell them, by the way, don't just get it from me. You should talk to your other colleagues who's number one and number two. Because there are certain things that the number one and number two person on the list is doing that you're not doing. And so don't just hear it from me, but also talk to them. And so that's a very quick way in which they can really move. This is the point I use about Kiasu. Find out who's number one, who is number two, ask them what they're doing and do it, but do it to the power of 10. And so I tell the guys who are number 13, number 12, and number 13, my job is to help you. Let's put it this way. You decide what you want to do. I give you input. Go out and do it. Get help from me, what kind of help you require. For example, one of the partners was trying to pitch for a project in Tanzania. So I told him, whatever you need me to do, if you want me to come there for a meeting with the client, the first meeting, the second meeting, do a Zoom call, I'm there. So I'm there to support you. Once you tell them that you are there to support them in full, then they really like it. In Malaysia Align and Shell, there's a lot of people that talk about competency. And I asked them, what kind of training do you think is suitable for you? We discuss the kind of training that's required. Then we do that. Many of them bring issues around conflicts with colleagues. This is a really serious matter. And they said, I have a huge problem with so-and-so. And we have to tackle that person. So I spend quite a lot of time dealing with people that come to me saying that they have quarrel with so-and-so, people in that particular team. And this is the reason why I cannot perform because of that quarrel. So I do play a part in mediating that, actually, and encouraging them to do that. Most of the time when people quarrel, it's because at the time when emotion gets in the way, people are no longer rational. And so I always try to tell them, how do you make people come to think rationally instead of being irrational about it? And that, to me, is the issue around understanding their contention styles. There are 5 levels of contentions. So people who are very stressed and very angry, if they're directive style, how do you tackle with a person like that? People who are directive, they're only interested in results. So when you talk to a person that's angry with you in the conversation, and if you know his or her style is directive, so what do? Talk about results. But if you talk about data and processes, they get even more angry. So someone who is accommodating style, what is it you need to talk to them to calm them down? It's about relationship, how to deal with relationship. A perfecting style person who's very angry with you and very emotional, all of them, they're only interested in time. Because perfecting people needs a lot of time. So when you talk to them, they're very angry. So you say, look, I will give you all the time you need. If you need 10 10 months to do the analysis, that's fine.
Can you define a perfecting type? What does that look like?
A perfecting style is someone that wants a perfect answer for a solution. That guy wants to sit there and really labor and really find a perfect answer. He doesn't accept an 80-20 rule. He wants 100%. But everybody who is a perfecting style of a person, they need time. So the language that you need to engage with that person is to concede, give them the time. There's another style called analytical. If the guy is highly analytical, the thing that they're really interested is data. So there's another style, the fifth style is the facilitating style.
Right.
People who are interested in the facilitating style, they're interested in process. Tell them, we will talk about process. I know you're interested in process. We'll talk about process. The moment you engage him in the process, then the guy says, yeah, he's listening to me. Then later on, then say, okay, now we talk about the data. Now we talk about the time. Now we talk about the results. Then they're okay. But you must calm them down. So when they are hot and angry with you because the conversation across the table is so hot, people are thinking from the bird brain, no longer thinking rationally. The only way to calm them down is to concede and give what they want. So
when Idris Jala is angry and stressed out, what is your bird brain default?
My brain default is directing. Yeah,
Okay,
I'm a
results.
directing style, results. And if you tell me that you're interested in data and in anything else, I get even more angry. So the problem with the Myers-Briggs tool, it presupposes and assumes that people only have one style. From my perspective, we have one style that we execute under normal condition. There's another style that we execute under stress condition. So to summarize, you must have a transparent way of measuring people's performance in a manner that's not disputable. That's why I said net income, the tax is an example. I gave you the example. That's one. Number two, when you discuss it, you must be able to identify the area of competency, the way the weaknesses are. And then you find the remedial, either through a course or through direct coaching. And the third one is how do you deal with people who have problem with conflicts and quarrel in the team. And this is very often, I find this to be a real problem amongst many people in the team because they cannot handle conflicts. And if you don't handle conflicts, everything is put under the carpet. They said, I'm not going to talk to so-and-so, I just leave the issue to rot.
Yeah.
And then things never get moved because nobody is talking.
Yeah. Back to that point on productivity is ultimately the responsibility of the manager or of the leader. I used to struggle with this because I took that as being, if productivity is my responsibility, therefore I must be seen to be the most productive person. Yeah. And I know because of that, I used to have this great problem with dealing with conflicts like you just mentioned. If one team member isn't getting along with another team member, or if there are just other problems in the project delivery, I used to think of it as, this is a real waste of my time. But I've come to realize that actually over time, that really is your job as a leader. Your job as a leader is to create the best environment.
Absolutely.
And naturally that would actually mean that it's okay for your days to be filled up with meetings with people to help them solve their problems. You mentioned if a leader who doesn't get involved in problem solving is not really a leader.
Not really, absolutely.
That problem solving also includes the interpersonal problem solving.
Yeah.
And I think when you have that frame, it also helps you to be a little bit more, if you are the type of leader who maybe finds it difficult to delegate work, if you accept that actually is also equally part of your job description, or in some cases, the higher up you are, that maybe is a bigger part of your job description, it kind of forces you to say, well, I really do have to start carving out time for this. And because I do this, obviously there will be a trade-off in terms of the other kind of maybe administrative work that I have to do. That forces you to think, okay, who can I truly delegate some of this other work to, so that I can free up space to help people solve their problems. So that has been something, maybe a mindset shift for me that I have found particularly useful. In the area of then addressing people's performance, we talked about ranking. You're a big fan of Ken Blanchard.
Yes.
Ken Blanchard, I think he famously said that feedback is the breakfast of champions.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about feedback. how do we give and how do we also receive feedback
Yeah.
as leaders in order to again create an environment for our teams and people within our teams to thrive?
Yeah. The most important starting point when you give feedback is start with the positive. Because we all like people to say complimenting us for things we're doing. So you have to spend time really looking at the positive things that the person has been doing, and don't be unauthentic. If you are just saying, "Oh, you are great," and you use positive words, but people think you are playing a game here. But you have to spend time looking at the very positive things that the person has done. When you cite them, and then you reinforce it with positive things, then you become very authentic in giving the feedback. So that's when you do that, that opens the door for them to be prepared to accept the constructive criticism. And then after you do that, then you tell them, I always begin to tell them the biggest room in the world called room for improvement. I have room for improvement. You have room for improvement. It's always a tremendous room. So now I'm going to give you some constructive feedback that are very useful for how you move forward. Normally, where you tell them the positive things, and then you begin by saying the biggest room in the world is room for improvement. They are a lot more open to taking it from you. Then you could say to them, what do you think about the feedback? Now you're asking for comments now. It's not a one-way street. So if the person is really taking it very positively, and you see that they are really, really positive, then you may want to come and say, I've given you some of that very constructive feedback, but there are some things that I consider the good, the bad, and the ugly. If you're prepared to hear it, I cannot back it, but normally these are comments that are coming out from your colleagues that are ugly. I cannot put numbers to it, but this is what I heard, what they're mentioning to you. If you would like to hear it, for good or for good or for bad, I will give it to you, but I cannot defend it because some of them here say. Some of them, depending on when you have the conversation, you shouldn't go into the ugly discussion. They're not prepared to take it, so don't do that. Do it when you think it's the right moment to do it. And some of them, they take it correctly, then they say, actually, that is true. And some of this is true. The other thing you tell them, I would like you to go away and ponder on this for the next week or so. Then we have a conversation about this, giving them time. Don't get them to just jump into it immediately. Want you to go back and think about this. If you come back after 1 week and you say that's all rumor and that's not true, that's fine with me. But you go away and think. And normally, I think some rational people, having now calmed down and look at it, they come out and say that's partly true and partly false. And they will say this is what is true about it, that's not true. And I think if you do that, you'll find as you keep on doing this more regularly, you mentioned what you guys do in your church. You do twice a week or once a week. You guys go. This is feedback, very regular feedback. In our issue here, we do problem solving. When we go and do issues, we don't talk theoretically about something. So if you have 10 projects you're working on, and 3 of them run into real problems, on a weekly basis, we talk about the issues. When we talk about the issues is to do with teamwork, people are not working there, this guy is not doing his job. All of these are real issues. And so we tackle them. When we tackle them, we tackle the problem not just from a standpoint of the person itself, but from the issues, from the doing side, and then the being will change. And then we return back to that point. And so problem solving is a very, very, very big part of feedback as far as I'm concerned. But when you go into problem solving, that's a direct feedback, but it's removed from opinion, but it's facts. And then you're really seriously. For example, if you 10 projects, 7 of the projects you have problem. And your colleague, 10 projects, none of them have problem. And the results you're showing, it's clear from my standpoint as supervisor, you're not doing a good job as composed to your other colleague, and because you're not delivering it. So I can see the problem on a weekly basis that you're struggling. And so my job as your boss would be to sit with you to be part of that problem solving. When you see me coming there to help you solve the problem, then you say, oh, this boss is actually helping me. I am not taking any of this personally now.
Right.
And so I think the feedback problem solving to me is both of them like hand and glove.
And actually, receiving feedback is also very important because So there's someone that I work with. He has a rather interesting approach. So he's very big on receiving feedback, and so he started this exercise on social media. There's a platform called NGL. NGL stands for Not Going to Lie.
I see.
And
Not
it's
going to
basically
lie.
an anonymous platform for people to ask questions. And there was a time when this was the trend on social media. So everyone would have a NGL attachment, and then they would put that up on their social media, on their Instagram stories. And then anyone can anonymously ask you a question, and then you can choose to respond to it. That gets put up as content on your feed. So he kind of started this exercise but positioning it not as people would say, "Oh, just ask me a random question," but he used it to say, "Well, give me your anonymous feedback or observations about me." And I thought, okay, that's an interesting exercise. He has gone as far as to now include that same platform in his email sign-off. So he will send an email, and then in the sign-off has his name, his designation, and then there's a link for people to give anonymous feedback. Let me know your honest thoughts about me, how I can be better.
Wow.
And that, to me, I thought, wow, aren't you also then inviting potentially some very unhelpful feedback as well?
Because it's anonymous.
Yes. I talk about this thing called the windscreen phenomenon, and that we tend to let the worst versions of ourselves out whenever there's some form of barrier. And when you have the barrier of anonymity, that then gives a lot of space for keyboard warriors to say things that are maybe even untrue, but also very unkind as well. So I asked myself, why would you invite this kind of feedback? But then I reflected on us doing this podcast. One of the reasons why I was so reluctant to finally make the step to release something is because of the fear, actually, of feedback. Not the fear of constructive feedback, but the fear of unhelpful, maybe even unkind feedback as well, as we put content out into the public space. But then I reflected and I thought, well, actually, over the course of doing this, and over the course of receiving, as much as we receive a lot of great feedback, we also receive some very unhelpful feedback as well. But over the course of doing this, I start to find myself, not only less affected by comments that are unkind or even untrue, but actually in being better able to deal with those sorts of comments, that also helps me to understand, why did I not like that comment? Why did I not like that feedback? What was it about that feedback that I didn't like? And as I'm giving feedback to others, how can I ensure that I am not doing that?
Sure.
And there are times when I think I don't really like the sound of that feedback. And then if I point it back to myself, I realize, hey, actually, maybe I've been also personally guilty of doing a little bit of that myself. But it's hard for you to recognize it until you've seen it applied to you.
Sure.
And so sometimes actually welcoming even unhelpful criticism can give you a better vocabulary of how to then deal, or how to give more helpful feedback to others. I've also realized that being a parent has taught me a lot about human behavior. Just today, we had a milestone moment with our daughter, Ayla.
I was there.
Yeah, exactly. So for the longest time, it would be very difficult for us to leave Ayla at home. If Andrea and I were to go out, the only other people that she would allow to be with her or to watch her is either you or mum or my in-laws. But we have a nanny at home. And for the longest time, she just would not want to be at home with our helper. And so I realized, well, what is it that, using this same thing, of what is it about the previous instruction for her to stay at home that she doesn't like? And then I started to think, well, maybe it was because the way that we had always positioned the ask was usually coming or usually maybe sounding like a bit of a negative thing. Because we would position it as, Ayla, Mommy and Daddy have to go out tonight. We have to go out tonight. Is it okay if you stayed with Auntie Rika at home? So there's a bit of a negative connotation because we have to go out tonight, and therefore you have to stay at home. And so that will always be received very negatively. So last night, we've had a very busy week. So I told Andrea, I'm very determined tonight to figure out a way for us to have some space on a Saturday morning, which we never have. Saturday mornings are always dedicated to Ayla. She can be quite demanding and quite a handful. I said, I'm determined to figure out a way for her to stay at home, just for the morning with Rika. She said, no, I don't think you'll be able to. I want to try. So then what I did instead is I turned it into a bit of a, make it sound like a game and something fun. And almost give her the sense of that she is the one in control of the situation. So I recognized that last night she didn't want to go to bed because she was really enjoying playing in Rika's room, which is her usual evening routine. Before going up to bed, she always wants to play in her room. And so I realized actually maybe that is the key lever, the hook, because she's enjoying that time so much. I said, Ayla, we have to go up now. So obviously she would say, I don't want to go up. No, it's not time. I want 5 more minutes. I said, no, Ayla, we have to go up now. But I tell you what, if you listen to, if we go up and have your shower and you go to bed, then how about we make a deal? How about if we do that tonight, then tomorrow you can spend the whole morning with Auntie Rika. And suddenly her eyes lit up. She said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
Wow.
Because then the ball was put, it was made to seem as though the ball was put in her court.
Very good. That's a wonderful psychology.
And it was then a positive thing.
Yeah, very positive.
And this morning she was so excited that she woke up and the first thing she did, she didn't even go to our room, which she normally does, because she remembered, today I get to spend the whole morning. That's supposed to only start when we leave the house. But she woke up and she went straight down to her room.
Wonderful.
So, I mean, when you receive negative feedback or when you are in an environment where you keep being told things that you don't like to be told, actually rather than dwelling on, this thing is so terrible or me being asked to do this thing is so bad, actually reflect on how can I then make sure that I am not doing the same for other people to create a positive environment for others as well.
You know, when I was in Shell, I spent a lot of time in Shell, 23 years in Shell. For more than 100 years in Shell, the way in which the Shell system operated in assessing staff, we assess staff in 3 areas, the staff appraisal. One is we assess them on the potential of the staff. That means we predict how far that person will go in their entire career in Shell, how far they will go, if they're given all the opportunities and all the training required. And that's what we call a currently estimated potential. That's one. So that means,
how do you measure that?
So there are 4 elements in the measurement. One is the helicopter quality, the ability of the person to rise above the details and at the same time come into the detail to be able to see overview in detail at the same time. We call helicopter. That's the H. Analysis, the ability to break down the problem into the little parts of the elements and then find solutions. Imagination is called AI, and reality, a sense of reality. So a person is too imaginative, not grounded on reality, is a problem. So we call it HAIR, H-A-I-R. And these are the 4 attributes, and that was a big study done by Professor Van Lennep. They did a big study, and together Van Lennep and Muller, and they did a study and found out there's a positive correlation between the potential or leadership of a person based on those 4 qualities. So the higher you are on those 4 qualities, the more likely you're going to go up the corporate ladder or even the country ladder as a leader. So the positive correlation came up to 0.887. Statistically, that's very positive. So for more than 100 years, we use that. So that's one. The other one is performance. So quite apart from that, how is the person performing on his or her job? And that's, we rank people. We rank them relative to the others based on the actual performance on the job. And the third leg is to assess them on the competency, the area of competence. If you're an engineer, there are specific discipline that you need to master to be able to be a good engineer. So for example, petrophysicists, so there are very specific competency areas. So we assess people on the basis of those 3. It's like a 3-legged stool, they're all together. If you don't have potential, it will impact as well, of course, your performance. If you're not competent, it will also impact your performance and vice versa. And so for many years, Shell used a system, and it was very, very good. So everybody that joined Shell, from the moment you come in, we make an assessment, even a fresh graduate, we'll say, by the time you retire, Leon, if you come there as a fresh graduate in Shell, we will interview you and we say, by the time you retire at 60 years old, we think you will make the CEO because we think you have the potential. We also tell the person, actually we interview you, as our assessment is that you will not make a CEO, but you'll be department head. And every year we make the assessment. So it can change depending on our assessment. So that's why we call it currently estimated potential. The beauty with that is this. To be fair to people when they come in, they look at the performance, then they will say, actually, if you are very clear to me, I'm never going to make the CEO, I better move out and find another job that fits me in the things that I do. Because I don't think I was suited in that environment. So it's very fair in that sense. Where the problem with that system is almost like self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes.
Because if we take you as good, you are going to get all the opportunities for development and growth. So after 100 years of using the system, by the way, Singapore followed the system, Singapore government, Lee Kuan Yew loved it, and Joe Sharp was the consultant who helped develop this tool. Lee Kuan Yew actually took Joe Sharp to come there and help them to implement in the whole of Singapore government. So they used the same system. But it was very good, but until after 100 years, there was so much people objecting to it. So we got rid of it.
I see.
We got rid of the potential assessment. So we only look now, by the time I left, we use only two things, the performance as well as the competence. But we do open resource and allow people, we don't do central planning. But I would say today, if I return back to performance, performance it's a function of three things. The potential of the person. If you have very high potential, that means you have the capacity to think about, analyze the problem, you have a good sense of reality, you also have helicopter quality. Chances are you are well equipped to perform better. And then the other one is if you're not trained, you don't have the competency, you wouldn't perform. But on the other hand, the staff they themselves, when they are given the assessment, they will know where they sit. They don't waste their time. And so in a way, we kind of find people who do not think that they will have a good future, they will leave earlier, rather than stick around and find themselves very unhappy. I think the worst thing to happen in any organization is people who never have something in their pocket. And I tell my staff this, the best people working in PEMANDU, the best people working in Malaysia Airlines, the best people working for Shell when I was there, are people who have something in their pocket. They ask me, boss, what do you mean by something in my pocket? That means every 1 or 2 years, you check your market value. You go and find a job outside. You get an offer, you get the salary offer, but you compare what you have, you decide to stay. And if you decide to stay, you know that you are not stuck in the job, because when you want to leave, you will leave. And when you feel trapped in a job, and you feel totally demoralized because you're not happy, you don't have options, then you are the worst possible people. So it's also good for you to know where you really stand.
Yeah.
If you have a huge missed judgment of your capability, if you think you're so good, you think you're superstar, you go and check yourself out, you're not really that good, you're not really in demand, nobody really wants you, then you also begin to tone down your expectation of yourself. Then you become much more realistic, you tone it down, then you say, I'm quite happy to be where I am now, then I'm okay, I'm not very unhappy. So I think it's good to do that. I encourage people working with me to every 1 or 2 years go and check out their market value.
What's your opinion then on people doing side gigs?
Just
side
fine too.
hustles?
I think for me, I allow people to go and do side gigs as long as it does not stand in the way of their task in the job. So in PEMANDU, we are very specific about projects. They are given projects, clear deliverables. And if you do that, you have side gigs, fine by me. But you must make sure you do your task and deliver according to that. But if you don't have a very good system of defining what are the tasks that are given and the level of expectation for them to do it, then I think you shouldn't let people do side gigs. Because then they were going to spend their time on the side gig and not do the job. But if you tell them, I don't care what you do any other your time, but as long as you fulfill this and you do this, that's why in PEMANDU we allow people, once you are clear about it, we tell them it's okay. Don't feel guilty going to the shopping mall tomorrow. You bring your kid to the school, it's fine. Go and see a cinema during the day, it's okay. But this for the week, you do this. And we don't really care. That's why we don't have offices. We completely don't have office. I don't have an office. I don't turn up in an office, but we all know what is a task to do. Most people, they say they cannot do virtual working because they are not tight in providing the task. So you have to be very clear about the projects, the task that is given to the individual, and the measurement are so clear. And if you do that, side gig, freedom to do, it's okay.
Speaking of shopping malls, I have to take my family to the shopping mall. You and Mom are celebrating your 37th anniversary tonight.
Yeah.
So we are going to the shopping mall. You and Mom are going to go to a hotel to celebrate. So I think this is a good place to end today's podcast.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Happy anniversary. And
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for listening to yet another episode of the Game of Impossible podcast. Please, we encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, also to our Spotify. If you're interested in some of the short form content, then we also post short form clips on both TikTok as well as IG at the Game of Impossible. Once again, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you guys next week.